Before I begin, I'll state right off the bat, Blade Runner 2049 is a pretty decent film, though I believe its development is, once again, a product of Hollywood's creative bankruptcy. Given the industry's dependence on franchise movies, sequels, prequels, and reboots, this film was a sequel no one asked for. Making this film was lazy and another example of a serious lack of originality among Hollywood writers and producers. Another cash grab exercise born out of taking advantage of a film audience's nostalgia and romanticism towards the original movie. Certainly sequels to iconic classics, if done poorly, can do nothing but damage to the original work, so it's always a risk. I think it's doubtful that fans of the original 1982 film wanted a sequel. That said, I don't believe Blade Runner 2049 is an example of a bad sequel, quite the contrary. It's among the better recent examples of sci-fi sequels I've seen. Just look at how bad Independence Day Resurgence was. Major spoilers ahead. Set 30 years after the events of the first film, Ryan Gosling plays a replicant called K, a member of the LAPD Blade Runner division charged with hunting down rogue older model replicants. After all, replicants are supposed to be slaves. He stumbles across a buried box on a farm beneath a tree while retiring a replicant believed to be a member of the Replicant Freedom Movement. The box contains the remains of a dead replicant female who, according to a forensic investigation, is believed to have given birth to a child, something that is supposed to be impossible. If it's true, it would change the world, maybe even start a war, as the status of replicants in society would have to be reevaluated. Kay visits Wallace headquarters, who serve as the new Tyrell Corporation in this movie. They make all the replicants, as well as his rather endearing holographic girlfriend. There he discovers that the dead woman is Rachel from the first film, the love interest of Harrison Ford's Rick Deckard. Wallace, the principal bad guy, and in my view the weakest component of this film, is determined to get his hands on the child, if it's still alive, and use it to expand his off-world operations by discovering the secret of reproduction among replicants. Kay experiences what he believes is a childhood memory from an orphanage. At first, he believes these memories were just planted there because he knows he never had a childhood. But he begins to reconsider this when he visits the memory expert Dr. Anna Stelline, I can't remember how they pronounce her name in the movie, who tells him that someone did live this memory. It's real. So the audience and Kay are led to believe that she's implying that it's his memory. Well, major spoiler alert right here. Plot twist. It's sadly not his memory. It's actually her memory because she is the child of Deckard and Rachel, not Kay. But at that moment of the film, that's exactly what you're supposed to believe. So Kay has to hunt down this child and find Deckard before Wallace's psycho henchwoman Love intercepts them. Long story short, Kay discovers Deckard in the ruins of Las Vegas, and after a brief altercation, Deckard tells him that he and the members of the movement made sure to keep the child's identity secret, erasing records and burying the truth. Deckard is captured by Wallace. They attempt to torture him with a recreation of Rachel, a shockingly realistic CGI reproduction of actress Sean Young. Props on that one. Kay defeats Love in a long, drawn-out fight and fakes Deckard's death so that Wallace won't come looking for him again. He reunites Deckard with his daughter and then lies down in the snow to presumably die of his injuries from the fight. Well, after all of that, is it any good? Well, disappointingly, Ford's appearance in the film, despite featuring heavily in the trailers, is really only a glorified cameo. Now, there have been plenty of cameos in movies that have been memorable in the past and have made a serious impact, but not this time. Deckard doesn't do much of anything useful and really just serves as a liability to Kay's mission, getting captured and needing rescuing from a watery grave at the end of the film, which I think is a bit of a disservice to the character. What we do learn about him is that one major question left dangling at the end of the first film is finally resolved. A classic long-term mystery, if you will. He's a replicant. Some would argue that this knowledge slightly vandalizes the original film, but I don't think so. It's handled reasonably well, but it's not revealed as a big, oh my god moment. It's offered to us in a very matter-of-fact manner. What I was most looking forward to knowing was whether the filmmakers would sell out and produce a fast-paced, modern Hollywood sci-fi action blockbuster, or if they'd maintain the original's tedious and slow cerebral tone and pacing. I'm not complaining because the first Blade Runner film is all about the ambiance and the mood, and if I'm honest, I don't think Blade Runner 1982 had a particularly interesting story. What made the film iconic was its production design, the dystopian visual effects, the unnerving and sinister atmosphere, the direction, the setting, and the music. The story was decent enough, though. It certainly wasn't bad. It just wasn't the strongest part of the film, and I think that's fine. Films are a visual medium. I don't think stories have to be the be-all and end-all game changer in order for the film to be considered an amazing epic, just good enough. Now, certain types of genres, yes, they need a very special story, but not necessarily Blade Runner, because I think a film can be bolstered by a myriad of other production elements that aid the artistic process. Now, all that being said, yes, Denis Villeneuve took the brave decision to maintain the original slow pacing. However, we have to be honest here. At 2 hours and 43 minutes in duration, that slow pacing is a bit of an ass breaker in the cinema. It's a lot longer than the first film, and there are simply too many long, drawn-out, and often unnecessary scenes that don't aid the plot in any meaningful way. They may add to the layers and textures of the world from a visual, emotional, and atmospheric perspective, but this film suffers from being too overindulgent and self-important at times. The visual effects and the realization of this nightmarish dystopian world are phenomenal, though, and potentially terrifyingly prophetic if you consider the world that industrial globalists have planned for humanity. It's astounding how they produce the environments, landscapes, and streets and skylines, a gritty, macabre, futuristic, cyberpunk film noir world that for all intents and purposes looks like hell, but it's an extraordinary achievement and adds to the visual legacy of the first film. Now, with that out of the way, even though I remember the original film well enough, even my patience was tested occasionally because of the slow pacing. Younger audiences may not enjoy this film from that point of view. As I mentioned earlier, the villain is not particularly interesting. He doesn't feature in much of it. He disappears entirely at the end of the film. He's a bit too cliched or something, like a rejected Bond villain. I don't really fully understand his background or motivations, but he's got a spooky voice, creepy eyes, and sits in the dark most of the time, so he must be sinister and evil, right? It's just too obvious and on the nose. Considering the moral quandary at play in this film, I just feel the movie could have benefited from having a more three-dimensional, complex, and dare I say, endearing villain, rather than what we got with Wallace. His henchwoman Love is actually far more intimidating and memorable. Despite expressing very little in the way of emotion and characterization for obvious reasons, Gosling does a very good job as Kay, and I was genuinely really disappointed for him when he found out that the memory was not his own. The real problem I have with this film may seem like a rather contrived gripe to some of you, but hear me out. The budgets, special effects, and production values are so high on these films, they can essentially achieve anything now. Every camera mistake, every visual flaw, every hair out of place, it can all be airbrushed out, edited away, fixed in post-production. They can recreate the original film and technically outdo it in every sense, except the original heart and sentiment. It's a technical cinematic wonder, but because it's a recreation, a reimagining, or sequel in this case, it can never really achieve the same creative impact. The cinematic accolade will go to Blade Runner, not Blade Runner 2049, because this is only ever going to be an elaborate approximation. Just like the CGI recreation of Rachel, a near-perfect simulation, but ultimately a hollow knockoff. Just as Kay plays the holographic recreations of Elvis and Frank Sinatra in the abandoned hotel in Las Vegas, they're not the originals, they're echoes, copies of the genuine article. And that's my issue with Hollywood's creative drought right now. It's all about looking back and repaving old ground, as opposed to moving forward and creating something new, which is what the original Blade Runner was, something new, an original piece of work. Blade Runner 2049 is certainly a watchable and no doubt to many people an enjoyable movie, but original and new, it certainly isn't.